So KG, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Doctor.
You're most welcome, KG, and it's great to have you on the show. Before we walk into the future, can you please tell us a little bit about your background? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a very small village in Mpumalanga called Piring, and we later moved to Leidenberg, a small town within the same area. Grew up in a colorful environment or colorful family, I'll call it. I was brought up by my mother as well as my two grandmothers. I was in an environment where I had my siblings, my biological siblings, but I also grew up with a whole lot of other people, being cousins and even some individuals that were not even blood related. But it was just the kind of environment where my grandmothers had a lot of kids. And I happened to be the youngest amongst all of them. I think we're about 16 of us. So I had the privilege of being the youngest. In those days, you get to, you get to travel with your parents, or you get to get all the nice treats that everybody else wouldn't ordinarily get.
And tell us, what was your dream career when you grew up?
So in those days, given that it was a very small village, small town, there wasn't much of exposure in terms of understanding what's out there. I think the careers that were kind of popular at the time was being a teacher, being a nurse, or a police officer. I was very close to teaching. My mother was a teacher before, and I found it was cute. I was also at a young age, I was a teacher's pet, so I spent a lot of time with teachers, and I thought it was cool, and that's what I wanted to do at the time.
And tell us who inspired you in your early days.
So I would like to think, given the environment that I grew up in, my two grandmothers and my mother, whom all of are late, are the ones who really inspired me and instilled a lot of the leadership values that I subscribe to. So they were chiefs in that environment. They actually, would take me along when they have things like community meetings where they have to rule on a particular matter. And given the fact that I was the youngest, and as I said, you do get privileges, so I was invited to go to those meetings. And for some reason, they every now and again they will actually ask for my opinion. As young as I was, I think I was about 6 or 7 at the time. I had not even started school, but they would actually, ask for my opinion. So I learned things like rank where you would ordinarily, and especially in a royal, in a royal environment, there's a lot of hierarchy there. But my grandmothers, just really created that space where I could actually speak my mind and provide some input as young as I was. And that actually instilled some level of confidence in me that even when my career started accelerating, I was quite confident to actually be around, whether I'm being surrounded by an all-male, executive team, or even a team that in some cases would seem to be more experienced. I was very comfortable. I didn't see that as a detractor. So I would say those three ladies certainly played a big role in terms of where I am today.
And KG, looking back over your career, were there any turning points where things could have gone different?
Yeah, look, I mean, if I think about like as I said, when I was still young, I wanted to become a teacher. I went to school, and you obviously choose specific, subjects that would take you into that direction. My teacher at the time, I was very good at maths, and my teacher thought I could, be a good statistician. But when I went to varsity and I took a totally different route, I tried a couple of, career streams that did not actually, um, I didn't find interesting until I found my, which I think is my calling, really working with people. As much as I worked with numbers and I found it to be easy and natural thing for me, I think working with people was really a calling for me, and that's when I decided that the psychology route is actually the one to go. And I was fortunate enough to work in banking where you can actually combine both. You can combine the numbers and then having to work with people, which I think for me it's a great position to be in.
And KG, what would you say is driving you today? What is motivating you? What is energizing you every day?
So I've got three daughters, whom I look up to as my coaches, and I I am, I am inspired by seeing. I've always been drawn to wanting to shift, how society has positioned, females in the past. And as I've mentioned, I've been inspired by my grandmothers as well as my mother. So having three daughters as well, it's something that kind of pushed me to really get close to having an interest in supporting females or women, whether it's within a work environment or outside from an entrepreneurial perspective. I want to see them succeed, and I want to see the world really becoming, I guess, embracing this, the gender equality. And that's something that I am intentional, even in terms of where I spend my time. From a mentoring and coaching perspective, I intentionally pick, females. As much as I also appreciate that we also have to do some work from a, boy children. I'm always spending a lot of time in terms of making sure that our girl children are actually set up to succeed in a corporate environment.
Now, looking into the future, and I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
Look, it's a good question. I mean, across all industries, I don't think it matters where you operate within. I think a lot of leaders are navigating this increasingly volatile and highly pressured, economic environments. I think the geopolitical um, environment that we are finding ourselves in, it's quite a, it's quite a stretch, and we are also expected to deliver results, at speed, whilst we have to, guide and lead teams in this uncertainty, as well as, we're seeing a lot of digital transformation happening across, and also the shifting workforce demands and expectations. So I think for me, in that context, we talk about agility, and I think it's a term that has been in the environment for some time. I think it's no longer a competitive advantage, but it's something that really becomes a leadership imperative. Um, but at the same time, whilst we're pursuing this agility that we need to have as an imperative, I think there has to be a balance, in terms of how we prioritize things like, well-being, sustainability, as well as long-term engagement of people. You have to strike that balance. So you have to create an environment where, leaders can thrive whilst you're building, skills that are critical, that are going to be critical in the future, skills like AI, which are quite needed as we navigate this uncertainty. So I think really it's just the appreciation that we are operating in a very difficult, highly pressured environment. And in the pursuit of that agility, we need to strike a balance in terms of the other softer which I now call them power skills that are necessary in order for us as leaders to succeed.
And KG, in your opinion, what is it that we have to do more to develop and encourage future leaders?
I think in terms of the things that are happening where we are now, I think you'll be left behind if you're not showing an interest in terms of AI. I mean, I see that as the future, if not something that should be happening or should be felt now. Um, I think we need to really be in a position where we are able to adapt with speed, and once we create environments where people can thrive and remain energized, as well as being able to perform in a sustainable way. We've got to also be intentional in terms of building a leadership muscle that it's also able to perform in an AI context.
Now, KG, these are challenging times as the world is stumbling from one crisis into the next. What is your advice for future leaders in terms of career challenges? What are some of the biggest career challenges they should expect to encounter and hopefully overcome in their career?
Yeah, so I touched on AI. I think for me, digital fluency it's quite an important skill. So if leaders are not are not investing in AI as in themselves to be AI fluent, I think they're going to find themselves in a position where, we're seeing the Gen Z, the new generation that is coming into an environment. They are already there. In fact, they are a couple of steps ahead of our generation. So I think bridging that generational gap is going to be very important. The other thing is, with the managing your Gen Zs, we are also seeing a different feel and expectation in terms of what they need. So really having to shift our policies and processes that can actually accommodate that generation is going to be very important, because they are very clear and outspoken in terms of what matters to them. They talk about you hear organizations talk about being human centric. And in most cases, it's something that is out there, but we are seeing the Gen Zs really forcing us to make sure that it's lived every day as they come to work. So we have to think differently in how we position our value proposition, because it has to shift. We cannot be operating in the traditional ways. So I think leaders have to really be, being intentional in terms of adapting to really becoming AI and digital fluent.
And if you were to develop a curriculum for future leaders, what are maybe one or two key skills you would want to factor in and maybe teach?
There's this the author Yuval Noah Harari. He's someone that has influenced a lot of global conversations, and I'm sure you've seen them actually speak in a lot of global platforms where they talk about the future of work. And I've touched on AI, but it's also around exploration. It's also about automation, and I think they argue that machines are increasingly taking on routine tasks, and as we see that progressing, we're going to have to shift the way the workforce thinks, as well as the leaders, obviously. And we're going to be looking at capabilities or skills like creativity, empathy, ethical judgment, your critical thinking will even become more valuable in leadership and decision making. And these are the type of skills that we're also going to be looking at when you think about the talent of the future. From a leader perspective, it's going to be those power skills, as I call them, traditionally being called, soft skills.
And KG, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
So the one that stands out for me, I've been in investment banking for about 25 years. And, for me, mentorship is about ensuring that the impact is felt, or the success of mentorship. It's when the impact is felt by both the mentor and the mentee. And I firmly believe that both play a very important role in order to see that impact. So I was very fortunate that my mentee, as much as I was bringing wisdom and experience into that partnership, it happened to be a learning curve for both of us. I went in with the intention to lift as a rise, which is something that I'm quite intentional about. But I think when I look back, I'm pulling it out as a success story for me, because it actually had an impact on both myself and the mentee. It was a female, again, as I mentioned. I get drawn into female professionals. So it was a female investment banker a couple of years ago, and this is someone who really wanted to crack it into a male dominated environment. At the time, I mean, it was mostly your male professionals who were really sitting in senior roles at the time. And being the only female around the table, it can be difficult. She felt the world was moving around her, not with her. Conversations were happening outside of her. Decisions were made in her absence, and merely because they will have meetings. As an example, meetings will take place at 7 a.m. and that's the time that she has to drop off her little ones at school, or they'll happen after hours, which is a time when the guys have decided to have to grab a beer, or to even go and have an hour or two of a sports game that you find that most female professionals are not part of.
Mm.
And I think for me it's something that I felt very strong, because it's something that I also went through. So and it's something that I also wanted to shift as a mindset, but also as a culture in terms of how people work in an environment. So what I did was to encourage her to make sure that she is heard, because I think most of the time, even ourselves who are going through the experience, we tend to think that people are doing it intentional. In some cases, it can be intentional, but I have found that in many cases, it was not intentional. There was just a, a bias that just existed, and it was normalized, because of, I guess, the industry, the evolution of the industry. When it started, it was mainly men, and obviously it evolved, and we started seeing a lot of females joining, that kind of career direction. So it was about making sure that you are ahead, confronting the issues, and really just coming up with, obviously, when you confront the issues, is to make people aware that this is how they make you feel. And then also come up with ideas in terms of how you think, the issues could be solved. So not just a matter of just throwing a problem at your leader, but it's also to say, I have noticed that you have meetings at this time. What would work is maybe you move the time to a 9 o'clock, which is a time that I'll be in the office. So just to ensure that they are being accommodated. And I have seen them actually grow. It's not easy, especially in a case where, as I say, you are the only voice. But I think in their intention of making sure that they work very closely with some of their your their fellow investment bankers, but also just making sure that they spend a lot of time with the leaders so that they can see the value that they're about to contribute into the overall work that needs to be delivered. I think really helped them, but also accelerating their pace in terms of development was another thing, which was for me something that I felt really helped them to deal with some of the issues. Because when I firmly believe that when you're competent, you are creating space for you to really be heard, because there's something of value that you're bringing. So I helped her, I supported her to really just try to also learn certain skills that she knew were quite important in her playing a role in some of the deals and transactions, and that kind of earned her the respect, because she was not just coming in as someone who's coming to learn, but also bringing some skills and knowledge that was not necessarily inexistent in those teams. This is someone that is currently playing a significant role or a senior role in their organization. They have grown to even run a business which is quite successful. So I'm quite proud of her. But I think for me, it's not just about the role that I played. As I said, I was also fortunate that I found somebody who was also intentional. They wanted to succeed. They were hungry, and that combination really helped for her to get to where she wanted to get to.
And tell us, KG, looking back over your own leadership journey, are there any role models of leadership who you have encountered and maybe worked with, who you would recommend future leaders should learn from?
Yeah, look, I mean, there are a lot of people that I think have really played a significant role in my career, and I don't want to sound biased, but a lot of those are people that are close to me. My current boss is the first one, if we were to think about currently. I report to a phenomenal leader who's really played a significant role in actually shifting my mindset. I've always been in investment banking, and she's the one who actually said to me, you gotta reinvent yourself in order for you to be relevant, and obviously look at where the world is going and work towards that. And it is the reason why I'm in this role today, which is in the center at a group level. And it was really quite an intentional move so that I can diversify my skill set. And that has positioned me in a much better way, because I'm able to influence across different facets of the business and not just in the one particular business that I was in. But if I were to mention people that are kind of, known out there and people can relate to, if I think of such an Adela, who's the chief executive officer for Microsoft, I think they've done some great work. They really widely being recognized for transforming Microsoft as culture, because as you know, transforming a culture is a very difficult thing. A lot of organizations find it difficult, and it's very also rare to see a CEO who's actually championing that kind of work, because usually, it's culture, it's thrown into the bucket of human capital. And we've always said that it's important that it's actually led from the top, and seeing that transformation at Microsoft, it's quite an amazing learning for many organizations. And what I like, he actually called a learn it all rather than know it all mindset. Because in life it's all about learning, right? It's a journey. Each and every experience that you have, it's a gift from the universe for you to learn. And his leadership philosophy, he emphasizes things like curiosity. That for me, it resonates with me, because I think as human beings we need to be curious. He talks about continuous learning, And these are the things that you would in an organization like a Microsoft, you would think that the type, the caliber of the workforce that is there is very much around people who have got it, they know it all, and that's why he was quite strategic when he mentioned this shift from a know-it-all to a learn-it-all. So I admire what they've done, because as I said, you can really see the shift from the old Microsoft to where it is today, where it's also pushing things like experimentation and collaboration, and that just demonstrates just how leadership behaviors can really drive and shape an environment. So that's the one person, and I make mention of the culture transformation because it's something that we as an organization are also going through and have been going through, and having done some research, I can tell you it's not something that it's easy to do. The other role model, obviously, again, going into the space of talking about things that are topical, it's the Harvard Business School professor, Amy Edmondson. I'm sure most people would know. She's actually contributed a lot in this modern leadership thinking through her research. She's done a lot of research and published a lot of papers around psychological safety. That's another thing that a lot of organizations talk about. As you know, that well-being is a big thing for it's actually a strategic intent for many organizations because of where the context that we are operating within. She recently presented a paper at the World Economic Forum, and her work really shows that teams perform at their best when individuals feel that they feel safe to share ideas. They can challenge assumptions, challenging the status quo, and they can also learn from each other and the mistakes that they make. She talks about innovation driven environments, where you create cultures that can allow people to really bring their best selves and become more innovative. I don't know if you had there's also one of the themes that came out of WEF, which is around the brain economy, and I think she's behind that concept. And then the last one, if I can throw in the last one, my favorite, Simon Sinek is a long time role model. I think it's also similar themes in terms of what he drives. He talks about purpose driven leadership, which again is a new concept that we are seeing penetrating a lot of organizations. We talk about moving from profits to purpose. So I like that concept, and I think his work has really influenced a lot of leaders, some of the successful leaders that we are seeing today, those who are really taking the lead around leading through purpose, which is something that resonates with me. So I think I've given you enough. As I said, I didn't want to come across as if I am biased and just leave it to my bosses. But I think in terms of those who are known out there, those are the three that I would pick for now.
Thank you, KG. And tell us, where can our listeners follow you and how can they connect with you?
So I've started getting active on social media. So I am on LinkedIn. I do try to be more active by really just sharing my thoughts and reflections around things that matter the most. Given my role in the human capital fraternity, most of the thoughts and topics that I put out there are very much around are people related, but I also sit on I get invited on industry roundtables where we talk about societal issues, as well as professional challenges and how how leaders can actually respond to that. Professional networks, I get invited to platforms where I contribute on various related topics. So yeah, I'm very active on the CHRO. So I know that there is a summit coming, I think in May. I will be participating as one of the speakers. I was on the HR Indaba last year, November, I think. So yeah, as and when I can, I do participate. I do get invited. Sometimes it's also print. There's been some industry magazines that I've also kind of shared my reflections on that.
Thank you. And last but not least, KG, what is your message to the millions of learners out there, and maybe even your children, uh, who are looking to finish school and start a career, enter the world of work? What are maybe one or two success principles that they should keep in mind?
So I think for me, I'm gonna share. This is more of a personal, journey because I've seen this. It works for me. If I look back in terms of how I got to where I am today, it's because of having a curious mindset. I've always been curious by nature, and that's how I was brought up. And maybe it's because I grew up around people who were more experienced than myself. If I take you back to my 7-year-old self, I was the youngest, so I had, my siblings and everybody else who was with me in higher classes, and also having to be brought up by my grandmothers. They were older than me, they were wiser than me, but I've always had the curiosity of asking questions and wanting to learn. And I've always wanted um, to walk into a room with something that is different, something that is new. And that's why I've never been intimidated by walking into a room that is full of people older than me. It didn't intimidate me. I was comfortable because I had done my work. So I always tell to the young ones, this instant gratification that they always look forward to. They always want, they want to see progression, they want to see promotion, they want to see things changing. It can only happen if you've earned your stripes, and how you earn your stripes is really through, continuous learning and also unlearning certain things. But over and above that, I think for me, what is important, and especially if I bring it into a corporate environment, it's quite hard. It's quite challenging. It's highly pressured. I've worked for, as I said, for investment banking. In those days, I mean, it was about speed, and sometimes when you run, you forget about yourself. So what I can give to my young self in my early career is really just to be kind to myself, and something that I remind myself to practice all the time. As much as we are running and sprinting and chasing revenue, and really just trying to be at our best. I think the one thing that we should not forget is the self-care. It's really now becoming the currency in order for one to drive. It is a reason why, in fact, if you look at the Gen Zs, they don't aspire to become leaders because they see how we show up. We show up compromising our health to the extent that you actually, get to a level of burnout. So my advice is really to say, as you are chasing that dollar, do it with responsibility, and that will require some discipline in terms of how you take care of yourself. And it is a reason why even at the last WEF, they were talking about this, brain economy, which really is about making sure that you invest in one's well-being first, before you can even think. If you're really looking for a workforce that is creative and innovative, it has to come from a place of, having your cup filled so that you can actually be in a position to give to others as well. So yeah, I am a firm believer of, success really starts with self, and not looking at the material things, but it's really appreciating that the new wealth is health.
Thank you, KG, for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership and reminding us that we need to stay curious in order to stay relevant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you so much for the time and the opportunity to have this engagement. I hope that we can do another one in the near future. But yeah, it was really an honor and a pleasure to be part of this podcast.